bring good news for the first time in a long time. You point out in the survey it's the first time since August 2008 that we've seen growth in all sectors, occupations and employment types. Is this something we're going to see going forward?
It's difficult to say at the moment, I mean, this being the first month, but I think some other indicators have started to point to business confidence in growing their infrastructure, expansion plans. And employment is connected to business expansion. So corporate credit extension, these sorts of indicators bode well for capacity creation and therefore job creation in the private sector. Of course, there's government employment, which has been rising at an extraordinary rate, particularly at the municipal sector. That we don't believe is sustainable on a whole range of levels. But I think we've got a good shot at good news over the next year from the employment perspective.
What do you think has changed over the past couple of months? I mean, you mentioned that we have seen businesses starting to employ again. Is this just an entire shift in sentiment that people think that the recovery is intact, that we are going to gain some traction going forward and we are going to start meeting some of those targets we've set ourselves?
You know, after the recession in 2008, the economy rebounded within 6 months. And the economic recovery to date in retail and a whole range of sectors has been quite strong. But employment has lagged, and that is entirely connected to business people's sentiments around how sustainable the recovery is. I think there's been a new appreciation that the recovery is in place, that it's sustainable. Obviously, there are huge international pressures, but South Africa is a beneficiary of many of those pressures, with improved engineering activity, mining activity, and basic materials activity coming from international markets. So yes, we've seen a big increase in mining employment, somewhat of an increase in the mining and beneficiation related manufacturing sectors. So yes, I think mining's been a big boost for us lately. So yes, there's every confidence to believe that the business expansion will continue.
Now, you did mention government employment picking up, and that's really not something you want to see because we already have a reasonably well-staffed government. We don't want to be wasting taxpayers' money, which could rather be put somewhere else.
Yes, I mean the government wage bill is at its highest level in history. Government productivity at the same time is at the lowest level in history. You know, jobs for incompetent people, jobs for unproductive people, this is really what government is about in South Africa, and it's not at all sustainable. Not even the measures recently announced, all of the billions of rands, about 150 billion in total, set aside for job creation initiatives by government. None of those are going to be sustainable. Well, perhaps the private sector will play its part. I think economic buoyancy we've got to maintain, and but really the private sector is the great hope. I don't think government is going to achieve any great shakes on the employment side.
Now, you do point out in the survey today that there's been a shift, and it's a shift we've seen for the past 11 years, from permanent to temporary employment. We do know that there are labour amendments lying in the pipeline at this stage, which could try and stop this shift. Is this a shift we should be welcoming? Is it an international shift we're seeing to temporary employment? How do we actually approach this?
Well, I think the first thing is that the terms permanent and temporary are incorrect. There's nothing temporary about an employment phenomenon we've observed for 11 years. You know, it's very much here to stay. Also, we know that temporary employment is the primary method for young people, retired people, working mothers, returning to work, unskilled, inexperienced people. It's the primary channel by which these people find work and gain work experience and on-the-job skills. So I think we should welcome the phenomenon. Maybe we should look to a change in terminology. It's a universal phenomenon around the world, particularly in Europe and Asia. The growth rates per annum of temporary staffing over the same period, the last decade, have been to in between 15 and 35% in big developed countries. Now, some people argue that we're observing temporary employment as a way to circumvent restrictive labour policies. But what we observe as a recruitment business and an employment services business is that there's a growing demand from young people especially for temporary kinds of jobs. They don't want to make the lifelong commitments that a previous generation wanted to make. So this new generation of employee is looking for lots of job mobility. They've no sooner arrived on the job, and through networks like Facebook and LinkedIn, they're starting to look for new opportunities. That kind of job mobility is necessarily connected to temporary work. In other words, work of a short-term nature.
If we do see labour law amendments coming through which try and put the brakes on the growth we're seeing in temporary employment, do you think we could see employment as a whole decline again?
Well, what will happen is the formal sector will decline, as it has been in decline for the last 15 years since the Labour Relations Act was passed, but the informal sector will increase. And basically, restrictive labour laws and legislation just drive legitimate businesses underground, and they lead to informalised labour practices. So yes, formal sector employment, the kind of employment that leads to taxes, tax revenues, and so on, will decline. But unrecorded employment in the informal sector will certainly rise, as it has been.